Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome back. This is our afternoon session for day two. We're starting with two keynotes. First, we're going to have a keynote by Professor Chris Gorse, and after that, a keynote speech by Don Ward. So let's start first with Chris' recording. We have a recorded presentation from Chris, but before I do that, I would just briefly introduce Chris. Chris is the director of Leeds Sustainability Institute and professor of construction and project management at Leeds Beckett University. He holds a number of positions. He's a visiting professor of lean construction at QUT in South Africa and also a visiting professor of University of Suffolk. He's also the chair of you may be familiar with Chris because he's also the chair of the International Conference for Sustainable Ecological Engineering Design for Society, SEEDS for short. He was also the past chair of ARCOM, and he's also a founding member of the Building Performance Network. He's currently a panel member of the sub-panel 13 architecture for the REF. And so he's working with also with Research and Innovation UK. And he's also has a lot of interest in the digital technologies and how they impact the built environment. He extensively works with the NHS Trust and educational estates and local housing providers. I know I see Chris frequently, and he said, I don't have enough time to do all of this. So we're very pleased to have you with us, Chris, today. I will now first I'll share my screen with background, yes, and here we are. Please confirm that everything is fine.
Hello. First, I'd like to thank
Dr.
Taha El-Hag and Professor Mohammed Dalami for inviting me to the CIB International Conference on Smart and Built Environments and giving me this opportunity to provide an address on leading the transition beyond
Mohammed, you've switched. That's okay.
A smart and sustainable built environment. I first want to ask, can COP26 make a difference? Our efforts to evolve and advance as a species mean that we now have less biodiversity, less natural habitat, fundamentally less for our children, who have not had the opportunity to see the abundance of wildlife that our childhoods encountered. Furthermore, the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, suggests that the expected 1.5 degrees C rise will put a further 20 to 30% of species at risk. And if we exceed this to a 2 degree C rise, most species on the planet will struggle. Since 1900, it's claimed that the abundance of native species in most land-based habitats has fallen by 20%. The lack of biodiversity that we had, the excessive pollution that we now produce, and natural carbon sinks in the form of trees that we have felled and marine life that we have cut now threaten our own existence. Some still claim that such figures are overblown. Nevertheless, the fact remains we've exploited the Earth's natural resources. Slowing down and stopping the activities that are inherently harmful to biodiversity and the human race is paramount and not just wholly sensible. Nations need to move together, but it's wrong to think that the contributions will be equal on all fronts. In the first step, it is the net contribution that is important, those that can bring the greatest change through the economy, technology, science and culture act first. So can we really deliver positive change beyond what we want to call net zero? Can we engender change that will reduce the speed of climate change? And furthermore, can we allow the natural world to grow and evolve? Can we engender a culture of net change that brings whole-scale improvements? If we can, the activity and new way of operation will need to be connected. Our environment needs to be smart, connecting resource and using less to achieve more. It is our net approach that will bring about change. Net means the combined contribution, some contributing more and some less where appropriate to achieve net zero emissions. And then we can start to replenish and rebuild a more inviting and habitable world. To take David Attenborough's words, is this how our story ends, or where the story of digital transformation begins? Can we give Generation X the impetus to rewrite the story, turn tragedy into triumph? Attenborough calls for a world to act as one. It is the combined effect. Those with the power, the economy and resource should be ready to push forward with technology that enhances the environment. And those with less make impact where they can and also position themselves protecting and planting the seeds for their future generations. Even deprived communities are connected, with mobile phones often being the one resource that lets the deprived communities know where water and food is available. We need to use technology to change, to protect, improve environments and helping communities become more resilient. We are in a space age. The world is digitally connected through our satellites. The only way to respond effectively is through a dedicated communication plan. COVID has taught us much. We can improve and adapt and work with a digital infrastructure. A mass transition of digital technology was forced on many during COVID. 65 million mobile internet users in the UK, which occurred in 2020 and represents 96% of the population. So is this how our story ends? With climate change affecting people today, people displaced, affected by forest fires, droughts, floods, poor air quality? Or are we ready as the great problem solvers to communicate and achieve change? David Wallace Wells' book, The Uninhabitable Earth, should come with a health warning. It presents a bleak picture, a bleak outlook for the Earth if we continue on our current trajectory. It promises it's going to be worse than you think. A future filled with famines, political chaos, economic collapse, fierce resource competition, unprecedented heat waves and hurricanes and tidal waves, wildfires and pandemics, a trajectory of public health issues. To a large extent, we're currently experiencing these. In 2020, there was an all-time high, or at least a 10-year high of disasters, natural disasters, that uprooted and displaced people, more than conflict. 9.8 million people were displaced through conflict, and 30.7 million displaced through natural disasters in 1 year. However, there is an opportunity to change this. This is a graph that first caught my attention and made me think that climate change was worse than I previously imagined. The data collected from the Vostok ice core goes back some 800,000 years, and not just the period that's shown on the graph. And it reflects a period where the Earth has been habitable and shows CO2 concentration levels ranging from 170 parts per million to just below 300 parts per million. The alarming spike occurred post-industrial revolution and sees the parts per million going up to 400 parts per million of today. What's so worrying about this graph is since I've been looking at it and looking back at the annual CO2 concentration counts, I can see that every year the concentrations of CO2 rise. And for the 15 years that I've looked back on this graph, I can now see the impact that my generation has had, even with the mind that we are damaging the planet. One of the most informative lectures that I attended this year was that provided by Professor Andrew Shepherd at the University of Leeds at the CIB Conference 2021. Professor Shepherd leads a group of scientists using satellite technology and advanced modelling techniques that have been able to capture data on the retreat of ice caps and melting of glaciers around the world. The research has shown that we're losing effectively a 10 kilometre cube of ice every year. 10 kilometre cube of ice is 1 trillion tonnes of ice. If we took a coverage of ice over the whole of the UK being some 240,000 kilometres, we would have a 4 metre depth, in excess of a 4 metre depth of ice being lost to the seas every year, representing that 1 trillion tonnes, just to give us some idea of the scale of what we're talking about. For every centimetre that the seas rise, we have 2 to 3 million people displaced. We have an increase in tidal waves. So we push up what would be normally considered small spikes in waves and make them tidal. And so the occurrence gets a lot more. As we melt the ice, we remove that refrigeration effect that the ice caps are having. We change the climate, we change our weather conditions. And as we've seen, we're starting to experience more severe and more changeable weather conditions. Greta doesn't really know what she's lost. Our younger generations are only concerned with their baselines. They've already missed out on experiences that we had. Our grandparents may have been ignorant and unconscious about the effects that we're having. However, consciously, we're choosing to ignore what we are doing to the environment. In the UK, we're now experiencing warmer, drier summers, wetter, warmer winters, more significant and severe winters, higher levels of flooding, higher winds, rain, a lot less snow. In 50 years, we've halved the biodiversity in the UK. It's taken us far too long to get to this position. The United Sustainable Development Goals were born out of activities at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in 1992, and the Agenda 21, and a plan of action to build a global partnership for sustainable development to improve human lives and protect the planet was launched. At the Millennium Summit in 2000, in the New York headquarters, 8 Millennium Goals were elaborated on to reduce extreme poverty. In Johannesburg, the World Summit on Sustainability reaffirmed commitment to Agenda 21 and the Millennium Development Goals. At the United Conference in Rio de Janeiro 2012, we established a future of what we want. And in 2013, an open working group proposed the Sustainable Development Goals. And in 2015, these were adopted. The question that I ask is, do we really want a healthy and sustainable existence? A healthy and a sustainable environment? I want to ask ourselves, what are the benefits to individuals, to organisations and countries? Are we going to really partner? Is co-creation a real thing? Can we work with other people in a net way? I want you to ask yourself, what are the personal health risks of doing nothing? And what are the business health risks of doing nothing? And what are the risks associated with engaging with the climate emergency and climate change. I want us to pause for a moment and think, if individually we were to own one of the Sustainable Development Goals, which one of them would our morals most closely align to? And which others are at the heart of what we do and what we believe in? And equally, to ask ourselves where our organisations fit and where their values closely align with the Sustainable Development Goals. We need to personalise these and look where we can do the most with the resources that we have to make the impact and contribute to the net effect that we're calling for. I'm going to change track now and look at what is possible. I'm going to use cars as an example. I'm often asked the question of, should I buy a diesel, electric or hydrogen? Which ones are going to be around in the near future? I think it's a wrong question. All cars in the future are going to be digitally driven, digitally connected, and so smart that they will not only know when they are about to break and which components are failing, but when you are about to break. The digital transformation of travel is going to be phenomenal. Cars are going to be so different. As the transport system becomes smarter and interacts, rather than one of the most dangerous things that is part of our lives, it is likely to become safe, or safer than sitting in our homes or offices or place of work. Transport will be more sustainable. We will need less cars. We will get stuck in less traffic jams. We will break down less. We might have one car instead of two, share cars, or not own a car at all. Some people will still have 2, 3, or 4, or 5 cars, and maybe 10. But most of us will travel in a less hassle and safer environment. The unfortunate truth is that the built environment lags well behind transport. Your home work will still for some time remain inefficient, hazardous, as they currently are. Internal environments are often too warm or too cold, insufficiently ventilated, and can be difficult to navigate and potentially dangerous. They are places where pathogens, viruses, and mold seem welcome. As we look forward with cars and transport, we should also look forward to an integrated and connected built environment. I'm sometimes told, and even my own research team, that buildings are complex systems. In some ways too complex to model, to know what is happening. They're affected by people, internal and external environments. Wind, rain, too complex to measure. And then I think back, a year after I was born, Apollo 11 in 1969 landed on the moon, with Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin taking the first steps. And in 1972, we had a lunar vehicle roaming on the moon. Back in 2004, there was a survey by Japan Electronics that found, on average, there were 30 sensors installed in each new car, and luxury cars having over 100 sensors installed. In 2015 to 16, a special issue on new road vehicles and sensors found that they were no longer counting the number of sensors installed, but they were looking at the purposes: vehicle and driver safety, speed control, driver vigilance. Information fusion was being used to highlight changes on the roads, conditions of the roads, potholes, obstruction detection, self-learning embedded objects being identified, advanced driver assistance, lateral fire force detection used, driver behavior analysis, driver fatigue and alertness, traffic classification systems, object identifications, pedestrians, oncoming vehicle detection, using multi-frame matching, to find the speed of oncoming and direction of oncoming objects. Vehicle stability, tracking, braking, stability control, communication control using radars, lasers, cameras, ultrasonic sensors, infrared temperature and humidity and pressure controls, hybrid controls that will allow us to drive safely, to have adapted cruise controls and autonomous vehicles. I did a quick check of homes and sensors in the homes. And apart from our smart meters and the PIR sensors that we use for security, we've not advanced as much as we think we have. There is much more that we can do with our home environment to advance them and to advance our built environment, so it also recognises how well we perform and behave within that environment and use that environment effectively. I'm currently working with a group of partners on Internet of Things and digital solutions to asset management, SRO Solutions being one of the leading organisations. We're focusing on where and how to incorporate digital technologies within buildings and how to integrate them. The most important stage is obviously the planning stage. At the moment, there is very little data from existing buildings. We've got a lot of information, but we don't know whether it's accurate, reliable, and whether or not we should use it. But in the future, we should become reliant on data and data that can feed back into the planning process. So when we're planning now, the feedback that we want is from the facilities managers, the patients, the clinicians, the occupants of buildings. We want to design them with the occupants in mind so that the buildings are able to respond and be the healthy places that we want to work and live. Most of the energy is consumed during the operation phase, so we should build and plan for operation. Optimum usability, again seeking input from the estates managers and occupants. The circular economy relies not just on the end of life decommissioning phase, but during operation we want effective maintenance. Parts of the building will need to be maintained and replaced, and we should be looking at end of life recycling of components rather than the decommissioning of the building, to extend the life and ensure that the building works effectively, reducing the embedded carbon and the energy. We need to design to operate and decommission from a circular economy approach. We need to reduce the amount of embodied carbon and embodied energy. But to do that, we need good, reliable data, and we need to know how effective our buildings are operating, and we can only do that with a good feedback system. Working with SRO and IA Connects, we see a huge opportunity to change our built environment. One area where we think that there are considerable gains to be made is that of the healthcare sector. Better understanding our internal and external environments and how they affect each other, with a focus on patient care and staff that work in those hospitals and healthcare places, is essential. And through the correct use of digital technologies, we were able to look at air quality, look at patient health, look at the micro environment around the patient, the macro environment of the ward, and look at how the interplay between the internal and external environments work, reducing the stress on the staff and on the patients, and improving patient well-being and recovery. As we start to digitise our built assets, it should be a lot easier to collect and understand our Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 emissions should be very easy for us to identify and report on. The Scope 2, looking at the energy that comes into the buildings and other direct supply chains, should also be easy. But we also need to work with our supply chains to understand exactly what the embedded energy is of the components that goes into the buildings and those that are used to ensure that they operate. We're only able to do that with the right digital technologies and connecting places together. This is a situ development in the Innovation District in Leeds. Most of this is now actually built. And what I like about this development and the approach that situ take is that they go beyond being digitally connected, but are constantly making the environment more inviting. They're constantly remodeling what is needed to increase the biodiversity and make this a healthier place and bring communities together, bring industry, the home and the natural environment together existing as one and reducing the dependence on car and carbon intensive fuels. Other developers, I think, have got to look much more forward thinking and work out how they engage communities in a very different way of living in the future. We have started to roll out smart meters across the country, and some of these are actually working. They will give us some idea of the energy efficiency of our buildings and the amount of energy that we're using. And will be other smart technologies that we put in our buildings. What we've got to do is ensure that our data is reliable and accurate. We've got to look at how uncertain we are about those data. A lot of the information that I see around buildings at the moment, whether digital or not, is inherently uncertain and variable. And some of it, when not connected, is almost pointless. So what we want is accurate and precise measurements of the performance of our buildings and also of other data which is important, such as how we're doing when we're within the buildings, how we're performing. We need to bring this all together so that we can provide better and healthier places to live and use our resources more efficiently. When I said that our built environment lags behind the automotive industry, I really didn't emphasize that enough. Far too many of our population live in properties that are inherently poor. They are not good for our health, they're underheated or possibly too warm in the summer. They are places where mold can grow, where pathogens and bacteria can thrive. Some places exist in places where there are poor air quality. And those with respiratory problems are suffering needlessly because of what we're doing within and around our built environment. We do need to collect data on our air quality, data on internal temperatures, on moisture content, data on the health and well-being of the occupants. We can advance and transform the built environment, and we should do so with a connected and a digital approach, building on reliable data. We really must unite behind the science. You must take action. You must do the impossible, because giving up can never be an option, in the words of Greta. These are my superheroes, not quite ready to take on the climate challenge, but I don't want to leave them with my legacy. I do want to engender a time of change when we become more responsible for what we're doing. And I do want to see our digital world reconnect us with our environment, connect us with our neighbours, connect us in a way that we can make a net change that is positive and brings a whole-scale change to our environment and reduces the speed of climate change and hopefully stops it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Chris, for a very inspiring talk. I really enjoy this. I would like now to open the floor for anyone to ask any question, make a comment on Chris' presentation. All right, Taha, beat me to it. Taha.
No, thank you, Chris. This is really valuable, and you ended up the presentation with a very strong message and a difficult message. And this is on the shoulder of single persons, as well as, so individually, as well as groups, countries, the whole world. And I can see the passion behind that as well, which is great. I have an issue actually, and it could be sensitive, but since Q2 started, and you mentioned you started with the COP, and we're going to have the one after the next here in UAE, and the next one in Egypt, I think. Developing countries, even if they are buying into all of that, the big question, which has been around for some time and is split the developed world and the developing countries, is who's going to pay for that. So the developed world for 200, 300 years, they built their infrastructure and the polluted earth for quite some decades. And now the developing world, they are starting their infrastructure. And then all of these issues of sustainability and environmental requirements and regulations coming into the equation. But the question, even if we want that, who's going to pay for that? It's a difficult maybe issue, but it's also very important for the developing countries and third world countries to build their infrastructure and the built environment. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Ella. I suppose what I really didn't stress enough was that I really want to consider that consider this a net response, and you know, it is incumbent on those with the technologies, those with the power, those who've done the damage, to take the first steps forward and to do the most work. And they do have the economies, the power, and the technologies. And I suppose I almost wanted to emphasise that with things like moon landings. Not every country flies a rocket to the moon or beyond. And have that same technology, but there are those people who can lead the science and technology, and I think at the moment there are questions of, you know, how do economies adapt to the proposals that we see, but I feel that the green economy it is one that will start to drive itself. At the moment, there's a lot. Obviously, it's going to take a huge catalyst to get this started. But once we do start to move forward, then the green economy will become a strong one. There is still that, you know, where I actually reference David Wallace Wells's book. It's not one that I encourage people to read. I picked it up and read it. Because I'd seen it on somebody's sort of in someone's library, but it was quite stark and worrying when somebody pulls the statistics together on climate change and more the political unrest and the poverty and famine that happens in some of the less developed countries, and the wars and the conflict that might take place, and that's what we've got to avoid. So, you know, when I stress that we really need to be digitally connected and we need to be communicating, and we need to come together to develop both the technologies and use resource appropriately to achieve change, then we've got to drive that, and I think we've got to drive it with the people in mind and the communities around the world. The one thing that digital technology is doing quite well in media is exposing us to some of the hardships that people are suffering, and I don't think we recognise this quite acutely enough. But when you start to see children dying and being affected by not just climate change, but by deprivation as a result of maybe changes that have been made in the developed countries, then people in those developed countries hopefully will take a bit more responsibility and reach out and support and fund change in the other countries, and I think we've also got to look at the assets in the other countries. You know, where the sun shines and where the rare materials are that we need for change, and supporting countries appropriately to make that change. And there's a lot that needs to be done politically, and with a sort of a globally connected workforce and attitude to bring about that change. So there's a lot of pressure that's got to come off the back of the COP in Glasgow to actually bring about the change in the developed countries, and then make sure that we're supporting developing countries. But I do think technology and smart approaches are the way forward, because we can do so much more with a lot less. And we can allow the natural environment to recover, and maybe we'll see new species instead of constantly eliminating species from our ecosystem.
Thanks, Chris. We have Shai.
Yes, thank you so much. Prof, I just want to ask your thoughts regarding how to train the next, the next generation of, built environment expert, because it seems that we've been talking a lot around how smart built environment, is the future and it's what we are supposed to be doing now and all of that. But the role of education, seems to be missing, and just want your thoughts on that and how to sort of prepare us towards that.
No, I think there are some real gaps in our knowledge here, but only gaps in sort of areas that are not as mature as others. So our lack of understanding of how to make buildings smart and how to predict their performance and how to respond to occupants is only a lack of maturity in our sector. And as I've demonstrated in other sectors, we can use some of the knowledge and expertise in other sectors and bring it on. And I'm, when we're working with people at the moment, is certainly in research, I'm looking for experts in scientists and data scientists that can help us manage and learn from our environment. I think we've got to transform quite a lot of our professional skills sector so that we do appreciate the information and knowledge that we can get from good data. But we have got to transform the sector by looking outside of our own industry to see how other assets are autonomously managed and more efficient. But equally, I think we've got to capture our own lessons that we've got from the past in terms of knowing our building stock and how we upgrade that and transform that. And that, at the moment, we're at the stage of prototyping retrofits and prototyping smart buildings or smart existing buildings, and very much the same with the new buildings that come along. They are prototypes. We're not yet sort of mass building en masse the energy efficient built environment that we really need. But I think things are about to change, and I think it's an exciting time. We've witnessed a lot of change during COVID. We can see that there is the will to transform the building stock now. So we now really do need to pull our expertise as academics and professionals and face the challenges of the construction sector. Start gathering good data about our buildings and those people inside them, and look at how they interact with the external environment. And I think there's a lot we can do. We can certainly use our built environment much more effectively. So it's not just looking at the structures, but looking at how we use them. And I think that smart technologies have a big role to play in maximising the use and effectiveness and efficiency of all built assets. So I'm not really answering your question. Is what do we do? I think we look outside of our industry and start learning from the other sectors that are advancing, whilst not throwing away the knowledge that we've got. But I think we have got to also change the way that we educate by drawing on the information that exists outside our sector.
Thanks, Chris. I have you made a very interesting point, and I think it's clear to all of us that the environmental issue is a global, and therefore, for example, what we experience in UK is not necessarily only because of what we're doing in the UK, which brings us that the solution needs to be global as well. We may invest in let's say in UK in improving the environmental performance and the carbon footprint in construction industry, but it will not achieve the same effect on our environment than, for example, helping countries in Africa or Asia. How do we address this? I know there is a political dimension to it, but for us as researchers in built environment, how do we recognize and provide our support that improvement in a country thousands of miles away from UK to improve their construction industry in this particular field will achieve more significant results than anything else?
I think that through digital environments like this, we can pull the parties together quite easily compared to the way that we worked before COVID. So we can actually look at problems anywhere in the world with those local communities, and we can start to try to address some of the challenges there. And we might quickly learn that we might have a meeting like this with some of the local residents, and quickly learn that we've not got the expertise that we need. So in a very cost efficient way, we can have preliminary meetings and gather groups of experts and people with the power to address some of these challenges. Notwithstanding that, I still feel there's always a need for people to actually visit the place where the problems are occurring, but we don't have to waste time and effort on those flights where we wouldn't have where we can recognize quite clearly we don't have the skills. But I one of my first presentations that I did in China, and somebody asked me, what did I think of their infrastructure and their built environment, and it was so different to that of the UK that I felt that I actually needed to understand that environment much better before I passed opinion on that, and that would be the same if I was looking at developments on the shorelines of Mauritius in communities that are established there, and some that may have been affected by tidal waves or tsunamis. I think we do need to visit them and understand the problems, understand why they return back to the coastal lines. I've seen far too many disaster relief schemes that then build people further inland and establish the resources inland, forgetting the fact that people are reliant on the on fishing to both feed and bring money into the family. You know, if we are to work out how to become more resilient with our settlements and areas and live more sustainably, we've got to understand how you actually achieve that, how you actually support your family, your friends, and how you develop and prosper and then contribute to a global economy. But I think that one thing that we do have is this ability to bring people together at relatively low cost quickly now. And you know, I remember when I was first looking at researching in Africa, where we were looking at mobile technologies and people getting access to water. I was thinking at the time, well, people don't have mobile phones in some of the communities that I was thinking about. And I was surprised that one of the first things that they purchased beyond food was a mobile phone, because it gave them access to their local economies. So, you know, the recognition that many of these areas and people may be sharing phones or sharing a computer, recognizing that we are far more digitally connected than we have ever been, and that some of these areas where they have very little infrastructure can grow in a much more sustainable way than many of our developed cities. Many of our developed cities are going to cost a huge amount to transform into energy efficiency and the so-called net zero contribution, but actually helping some of the communities that have lived like relatively sustainably transform into a stronger community that's more resilient and has some of the benefits that we've appreciated in the developed world, and the comforts and the health benefits that we've got, but without having a negative impact on the environment, is far more achievable, I think, now with the way that we're connecting in a smart way. So I think we've got a lot to learn in terms of how we communicate and how we pull good multidisciplinary expert teams together, and how we can connect with communities to make change.
Thanks, Chris. I think there's a great idea here, and the CIB and different working commission task groups can play in organizing smaller events, more focused, more informal, more frequently, encouraging different parts of the world, different countries, to organize them online, half a day, 2-3 hours, and then it facilitate the sharing of knowledge. Thank you very much, Chris. Excellent presentation, very inspiring. Now we have our next keynote speaker, and that's Don Ward. I think many of you guys know Don. I've known Don for a long time now. Many of us know Don for Constructing Excellence. He led that institution, a very influential institution, not only in UK, but globally. He was also active in the Middle East and beyond. He's now the CEO of the CIB, which organizing this particular conference. He's leading a significant change within the CIB to help us respond to the challenges facing the construction industry. Don has 35 years experience in innovation best practice. I think construction industry, especially in the UK, he's a well-known figure, a frequent speaker. He's specialized in policy making, industry change, strategic procurement, supply chain integration, collaborative working. If anyone interested in some very interesting material, can go to Constructing Excellence and look up collaborative working, and of course sustainability. In 2007, Don was awarded an industrial fellowship in infrastructure development with the Alliance Manchester Business School of the University of Manchester. Don, we're very happy and delighted to have you with us today. CIB, are you ready to play? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Don Ward, Chief Executive of CIB, and I'm delighted to have been asked to give this presentation on the subject of innovation and improving the impact of global collaborative research. My background, I studied at the University of Bristol, physics, and for 10 years, I was a building physicist at the Building Research Establishment, the UK government's research agency at the time, now a charitable foundation in the private sector. And in '95, I was seconded to work with Sir Michael Latham on the implementation of his seminal UK report, Constructing the Team. And I was chief executive of the Construction Industry Board, also called CIB, until 2001, when I took over the Design Build Foundation role of CEO. That was a industry think tank and membership organisation associated with Reading University. And in 2005, that became part of Constructing Excellence. And for something like 12 years, I was chief executive of that organisation. In the later years, expanding to grow it internationally, and in particular to develop an organisation here in the Middle East. And then in early 2020, I was offered the role of Chief Executive of CIB. It's an honour and a privilege to have that role. The timing is absolutely extraordinary. It was right at the start of the pandemic. So it's been a challenge working with academics as a non-academic, but an inspiration and a massive opportunity at the same time. And it sort of brings to a pinnacle, really, my career, which has always been somewhere in the nexus between government policy, industry, and academia or research. In what I have to say today, I just offer one caveat. I'm often expressing the views and the policies of CIB today, but I'm also often expressing some personal views that are not yet CIB policy. I say that firmly with tongue in cheek. So an introduction to CIB, Concierge International du Bâtiment. Forgive my terrible French accent. I like to use that French name partly because it's easier to remember than the English. But essentially, we're the global network for collaboration for innovation in the built environment, which is perhaps another easier CIB to remember. Established in 1953 as an NGO on the initiative of the United Nations. And I'm going to major on this as a point of principle, really, in terms of the potential influence of CIB. Our objectives today are very much to provide a global network for researchers and research to improve the performance of both through meeting, sharing, and learning, and to promote the value of research as a vital contributor to industry development and societal growth, and hence how important the Sustainable Development Goals are for us. The core activities of CIB add value for global research through the 40 plus working commissions and task groups on every subject that you can probably think of. I'll share that list a little later. 18 student chapters and an early career researchers network, running conferences, publications, 30 partner journals for the publication of research papers, a database of over 27,000 past research papers, and various other activities to help with the dissemination of ideas. And our flagship event is the World Building Congress in every 3 years, and in 2022 it's in Melbourne in late June, and our fingers are firmly crossed that we will actually be able to be in Melbourne. If we are, it will be the 22nd. Well, it'll be the 22nd, whether or not we're face to face, of course, if it has to be online. But we're firmly hoping that the world will be in a better place in terms of impact of the pandemic, and that we will be able to gather face to face to discuss the subject of building our future, informing practice to enhance the lives of current and future generations. I'd just like to talk about one or two global trends as the backdrop to innovation and research and impact in our sector. I like the PESTEL framework. I guess my interpretation of it at the moment is really dominated by the impact of COVID-19, whether in terms of government policies, economic impact, social impact, of course, and technological. I won't go through this analysis. I think everybody's take on these are probably different. And by the way, the slides are available from the organisers should anybody wish to download them, or indeed should any of these slides be of value to you in your own presentations to other audiences. I'd be delighted if you were to use some of the CIB material. I mean, talking about the impact of COVID-19, and these are based on statements and ideas that I've heard discussed at CIB webinars over the last 18 months. You know, ranging from huge levels of government borrowing initially for furlough schemes and other lockdown policies, and well, not to mention the healthcare policies such as vaccination rollouts that have been required. And of course, the post-pandemic investment in infrastructure and programs such as Build Back Better, as the UK slogan has it. Other impacts in terms of what we build, you know, it's certainly looking like less office space and physical retail as we work more from home and shop more online. Perhaps what we've seen in terms of people returning to work but using more cars and less public transport is not a trend that will continue for the longer term. Let's hope not for some reasons, but you know, it's an evident trend, it seems to me, at the moment. For many of the audience today, the challenges have been felt in universities, and for example, students unable to attend in person, and therefore the increased rollout of hybrid or blended teaching, and generally fewer face-to-face meetings or conferences, with the, you know, harm paid really to the potential level of relationship that otherwise would ensue. And in terms of impact on our sector's processes, you know, there was undoubtedly a disruption of global supply chains, and which has led some to conclude that local supply chains are easier to manage, and if that has an unintended consequence of greater social value and local employment, well, that would be seen by many as a very, very positive impact indeed, as would a greater attention being paid to mental health and well-being, and the rapid acceleration of digital adoption, including home working and online learning, and the reduction in carbon caused by the reduction in economic and activity and travel during the pandemic, during its worst phases, looks like that isn't going to be sustained. But you know, what can we do that would sustain that for longer? And two phases that leapt out at me for reasons which have to do with my background in constructing excellence. And I've heard statements like, well, we'll see a move to more collaborative approaches and more of a focus on whole life value, and whether that's measured in money or in carbon. But it kind of feels like we've been there before. So I think the jury's out on whether that will genuinely happen. It'd be an extremely positive trend and move if it did. All in all, I've heard COVID-19 described as the Great Reset. I'd certainly agree that for many, it's providing the impetus for the great rethink. Whether we then collectively, practitioners, policymakers, researchers, can convert that to the Great Reset, well, time will tell. And boy, does it need a reset, because when you look at the structure, conduct, performance of the sector, really pretty much around the world, in structural terms, there's fragmentation, a high proportion of SMEs, and a separation of design from manufacture and installation, pretty unique compared with any other industry. A high level of self-employment or migrant workers, if we think about the Middle East, where we are right now, at least virtually for this conference. In terms of conduct, a fragmented process, a focus on capital, cost, well, initial price, not on operational costs or whole life cycle of the built environment, again, whether measured in money or carbon. Lowest price bidding dominating, and poor payment practices, poor health, safety, welfare, poor skill levels, sometimes a disregard for the natural environment, all kind of consequent from a focus on lowest price. And performance in terms of corporate performance, very much boom and bust. Projects too often late and over budget, industry firms showing poor levels of profitability, perhaps relatively poor pay levels, and too often skills shortages. So there's plenty to improve and plenty to reset, if indeed that is what we might be able to achieve with COVID as a result of COVID-19. And if it isn't for COVID-19, then pre-pandemic, you know, we were focused on enough reasons and priorities for change in any case. Extraordinary how many countries I saw this report as being presented, and how many governments referred me to it over the past 5 years. The McKinsey report on the construction productivity imperative. I mean, if only this had been a bunch of academics, preferably under the banner of CIB, or at least carrying the CIB imprimatur, rather than relying on a blue chip management consultancy to produce such a document. I kind of look at this and think an opportunity missed from the point of view of really exploiting the potential strengths of the academic and research base. Nevertheless, a very influential report, and as a beacon for CIB to think about emulating. Grenfell Tower was already severely impacting the rethink of our sector. Described as systemic failure of our industry, which undoubtedly was from top to tail, from start to end, from conception and design of buildings to their construction, their maintenance, their management, and inevitably going to lead to systemic reform. The jury is literally still out, and inquiries are still ongoing in the UK. I have no doubt that this will have major consequences for the construction process, not just in the UK, but right around the world, as people watch to see and understand what impact this may have on other jurisdictions. And perhaps most recently, because we saw COP26 in Glasgow only a month or so ago, and the ultimate and arguably most important framework or driver of all, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This is a beacon for CIB. This is a vision for CIB. This defines better than anything, I think, the raison d'etre of CIB, not only because of our origin in the United Nations, but because this is all about the quality of life. And when you look at the impact on and by our sector relating to these goals, some of the goals are obviously all about our sector and healthy industry, sustainable cities and communities. Other goals are very much about how we will be able to deliver our processes and activities in the future. And there is a lot of research material available around all of these subjects, identifying the challenges, but also ideas and solutions. And then there's the goals that relate to the products of our sector, whether it's good schools, good hospitals, good sewage and water systems, good energy and power systems. And then there are the ultimate goals of reducing inequality, hunger and poverty. So wherever you look in this framework, you have an impact on or by construction and built environment. And I think that is sufficient justification to ensure that we put this right at the pinnacle, right at the top of the purposes of CIB going forward, to make sure that the impact of research and innovation is positive in terms of all of these goals. And that brings me to talk about the subject of impact and innovation. I suppose I should define my terms, because I will, as a non-academic, undoubtedly be using terms extremely loosely in how I'm presenting today. I'm thinking about innovation in terms of the commercial exploitation of new ideas, and I'm thinking about impact in terms of the effect it has on what I might pejoratively call the real world. And in particular, I'm focusing on practitioners and policymakers. I absolutely acknowledge that impact. There is value in contributing to global knowledge, and I absolutely recognize and indeed embrace and wholeheartely support and buy into models such as the triple helix, as I think I explained. Even in my own career, I feel like I've been sitting at the nexus, at the middle of this Venn diagram for much of my career. Nevertheless, for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to talk very much about impact with practitioners and policymakers. And, you know, we've got a good example, starting with sustainable construction and the impacts in support of the Sustainable Development Goals. Well over half of our working commissions and task groups focus on sustainability. Today's accelerating innovation in construction, the newest one, nature-based solutions, fairly obviously, but building pathology, climate change, construction in developing countries, safety, health and well-being, construction, smart cities, urban resilience, intelligent responsive buildings, water supply and drainage. You know, it's all the aspects of, or virtually all the aspects of sustainable construction are being addressed by CIB's commissions. What I hope is that we can communicate better the alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. I just wanted very briefly to share with you 3 initiatives or 3 partners that we're working with to ensure greater impact of CIB's work through collaboration with these third parties. And they are the SBE Conference Series, the Globe Consensus, and the Global ABC. Very simplistically, I could categorize these as representing knowledge sharing and learning, research and compilation, and policy influence. And really, here's why. The SBE Conference Series, Sustainable Built Environment, our partners include FIDIC and UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Programme, a world conference every 3 years, and a bunch of regional conferences in between. Globe Consensus, first published as a manifesto in October 2020 by a lot of academics and industry researchers and professional bodies and others. A product of the liaison committee of the 6 international civil engineering associations here, including the CIB. And its implementation just announced, led by a new joint committee. And any interest in this area of work, please check it out on the website first, and then do get in touch with us, with me, on any of the issues raised in today's presentation. And finally, the Global ABC, the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, the global coordination body on buildings to feed into COP. And as such, wouldn't it be great if reports such as this on the right carried CIB's imprimatur in future? And I don't mind if that's set as a yardstick. I think that is a achievable and appropriate ambition for CIB, with our commissions at the forefront to seek to achieve. Because we can't tackle the climate change crisis without changing construction. That's what the World Economic Forum said. That's another organization with whom I hope CIB will have closer ties in the future. We can't tackle those with, you know, at a continental level. There's the European Commission strategy, without input of think pieces and reports such as this. And here's another report that I hope in future would carry the CIB imprimatur in some way. And finally, on this theme, and bearing in mind today's conference is held in the MENA region, it's an underrepresented region in CIB and the global research network generally. The Gulf and the Middle East has its own distinct context of climatic and geopolitical factors, of course, as does any region, delivery, worker welfare, procurement, payment, climate challenges, the role of are all factors in making the region particularly interesting, if you like, or challenging. But of particular relevance to my words just now, this is the region where the next two COPs will be held. COP27 will be in Egypt, COP28 will be in the UEA. And by the time we're back in the UEA for COP28, I hope that CIB's imprimatur will indeed be on some of the key documents and be influencing some of the key debates and decision making forums that are taking place and that are used for that Congress. Talking more generally then about impact of CIB, this is the full list of our 40 working commissions and task groups as I speak. And nothing occupies the thoughts of Michael Beam, CIB Programme Director, and myself more than the question of how we can help commissions be more effective, how we can help them have more impact. I think it starts with greater profile. We've tried to do our bit with a series of interviews, recorded video conversations with research leaders in our sector. Have a look at CIB in Conversation for some of those. I have a vision of an annual impact report in which our members and our commissions would share the best examples where they have been able to influence practice or policy making. And I think it's important that commissions start to communicate what they're doing to a non-technical, non-research audience. And I see a series of CIB insights, briefings on the state of the art in terms of what we know, the future research agenda, but most crucially, including an impact statement aimed at policymakers or practitioners or both, showing how their work, the work that is of the Commission, is addressing which sustainable development goals. And I think all of this will help with wider stakeholder engagement. And that's certainly a goal of Mike Beam and I to facilitate greater collaboration with a wider range of such stakeholders. Thinking about the younger generation and student chapters and early career researchers, Generation Y, Generation Z, and with a different set of values to my generation and others close to mine, more aware and more keen to make a difference, to do something about the planet and climate change, to focus on fairness in society, and focused on fulfillment as a balance of addressing these issues here. And with that in mind, CIB, first founded the student chapters back in 1998, and they're a local network. Each of them is a local network centered on a particular university, bringing together its PhD students for professional development seminars, top research seminars, as well as helping them form their early professional networks. What we do is provide a number of awards and funding for those chapters. I'm delighted that one of those is the Sebastian Future Leaders Award, named after the only man ever to have been both President and Secretary General of the CIB from Hungary, a remarkable achievement from behind the Iron Curtain in those days. He gave his name to this award for future leaders of the building sector. It's a grant for a CIB student chapter to carry out research, and the current winner is the University of Hong Kong, addressing a resilient communication model for CIB connecting academics and industrial practitioners, which of course I am delighted to see is aligned to the theme of impact and innovation. The Best Doctoral Thesis Award, presented this year for the very first time, and won by Dr. Eftekarian with a fantastic presentation, not just a great thesis, but a great presentation which brought alive his topic through video in a non-technical and easily understood way for stakeholders. And for that reason alone, I thought he was worthy of the prize. his congratulations also to the runners-up. But Dr. Eftekarian was a fine example of how to communicate the value of research to a wider non-technical audience. We've given 2 consortia of student chapters additional funding this year to support work on higher degree by research and perspective for ECRs, practitioners and entrepreneurs on post-COVID evolution in the industry. And again, how pleased I am at the alignment here with the topics of my presentation today. Early career research is when one moves from a master's or PhD into, say, the first 5 years of one's career in research, whether that's in a university or in a research and technology organization or in an industry firm. You need to develop your own network. You have certain other challenges that you need help with, including mentoring. And this network is a child of its time, very much an online only network, therefore very easy to access. Its events are always online, often repeated, and always available to download from our website to view after the event in any case. So I do commend this network to anybody. But what it raises really for me is the bigger question of how can we help students and early career researchers more generally have more impact, because that is what they're looking for in terms of fulfillment in their career. And this is a rhetorical, well, it's not a rhetorical question, but it's a question that I'm not going to seek to answer today. It's one I want to leave with you, and be grateful for all sorts of contributions of thinking. In asking this question of others, 2 answers have been put to me already. One is that CIB has tended to focus on adding value in the research field, but in the university context, for example, should we be focused also on adding value in teaching? Because in relative terms, there is probably more funding and importance being attached accordingly for teaching as compared to research. So I think that is a really important question to answer. Then the second question is, of course, what would we do? And the second idea is around top 10 tips for engagement with industry practitioners. So how can we develop the next generation of researchers to instinctively and proactively engage with industry practitioners even more than previous generations have done so, including connecting with industry networks such as my previous Constructing Excellence organization, or CII in the United States, or the Centre for Smart Construction here in Dubai at Heriot-Watt University, Dubai. Thinking about journals, one of my last thoughts for this presentation today. CIB has 3 recognized journals with a long pedigree of high quality publishing of research papers. Building Research and Information, which was the original CIB in-house journal actually, Construction Management and Economics, and Built Environment Project and Asset Management. And many of you will be subscribers and regular publishers in those journals. We also, of course, have 28 additional encouraged journals, and again, when you have the slides, you'll be able to see all those names very clearly. What I'm interested in the context of my theme today is how can we make more impact with those partner journals. You know, our encouragement or our recognition of them is intended as a mark of research quality. Is it a mark of impact? However, we've worked quite hard. In fact, each of the 3 editors of these journals have done a Meet the Editor webinar for us, in which they've shared with our viewers ideas about what makes a good paper, what makes a good reviewer, and all sorts of other tips. And I do commend the recordings of those webinars for you to watch. It's interesting that we've been able to influence over 20 of our partner journals to produce special issues next year associated with the World Building Congress. And I'm very pleased and happy and delighted and thank them for their support in that way. I'm also interested to work with to understand more, for example, the impact of Richard Lorch's initiative with Buildings and Cities, in which he plans to publish a series of briefings on key topics, including the statements on impact for practitioners and policymakers. And all of that and my conversation with Richard have led me to think in terms of CIB Best Papers Awards, to be drawn from the best papers in each of our partner journals and to be awarded with the very important criterion of impact, and impact in not in terms of the journal's KPI for most cited articles, but in terms of impact for policymakers. And finally, turning back to the World Building Congress, well, actually, the value of conferences more generally. And my final theme of this presentation today: how do we improve the impact of conferences? To what extent can face-to-face be the norm in future? I know there are plenty of people in the CIB network who think we will go back to that previous world where the default position was a face-to-face conference. But webinars work well in their place, and there is a big question about whether the added value of face-to-face contact, discussions and networking is now clear. Ironically, it probably is clearer as a result of not having been able to experience it for the last 19 months. But we're going to need to articulate it more strongly, because restrictions on travel to me look inevitable, whether those are imposed by governments or by corporate policies or by individual choice. And so the case will have to be made for face-to-face attendance at conferences. It will be at a premium, and conferences, we collectively need to ensure attendance in person is worth the extra cost, time and carbon. And that means innovating the formats, the contents and the outputs of conferences. And I look forward again to the debate and the discussion around some of those ideas. So in conclusion, I leave you with this thought. I've emphasised a lot how CIB is aligned and needs to be aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals in order to make an impact and in order to demonstrate that impact. And I genuinely believe there is no other sector which can do more to contribute to those Sustainable Development Goals than the construction, building and built environment sector. I think it gives us a noble cause. I think it gives us a huge inspiration and potential draw for the younger generation to be part of what we stand for. So thank you very much. I'm honoured to have been asked to speak. I don't know if I've done justice to the tag of Keynote today, but I hope I've shared some content which you found interesting. My aim was to encourage and stimulate debate and ideas about how best to improve the impact of global collaborative research in our sector. And I look forward to engaging with everyone further, not just at this conference, but well into the future, to make a difference in this respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Thank you very much for this very exciting presentation about the CIB and the role of the CIB, which brings me to, sorry to steal the first question. When it's come to research, we have academic research, we have industry researchers. And I think in certain parts of the world, which you mentioned, and we at the CIB tend to struggle in attracting membership. Universities are seen as teaching institutes, and if you stretch it, they may be looking to see academics publish papers. They do not understand what an institution like the CIB is doing. In fact, you'll find the research that you're talking about in terms of impact is not in universities. It's actually in research organization, in government organizations. Do you think the CIB can be attractive to both type of researchers?
I do think that, Mohammed. I'm not necessarily saying that we're in the right form yet to be attractive in that way, But, you know, the foundation of CIB was with the RTOs. It was with the European research, government research organisations, such as my own previous employer, BRE, such as CSTB in France, BBRI in Belgium, TNO in Netherlands, etc. Since that time, I'm delighted that, you know, and my predecessors have been delighted that universities have very much got more and more involved. But it was a conversation with one of our board members, one of the very first face-to-face meetings I was able to have in this role after something like 18 months in the job, that led me to thinking about where the balances of funding for universities. And as I sort of hinted, I think CIB doesn't yet have a strong proposition on the teaching side for universities, but I think it's well worth considering how we would do that. Of course, we have a commission, which number is it? 89, Working Commission 89 on education in the built environment. But I think there's all sorts of possibilities for what we could do more. If there is support that people want to do that, and if it's something that CIB can uniquely do, because I don't know what other networks there are at a global level which are bringing together teaching establishments to learn and share together in the way that CIB does with research. So, you know, let's have the debate and let's get to World Building Congress next June and, you know, start to see if there is a consensus amongst the current membership and the potential future membership about how we could do that.
Next is Shoaib.
Thank you very much, Prof. Don, thank you for your presentation. And it was just as if Prof knew what was in my mind. Okay, that's the first part of my question. But the second part of my question is, so what would, any thoughts on what CIB can do to make sharing of, you know, academic research much more easy and impactful to the industry rather than just publishing in academic journal? Because I mean, I'm asking this question based on the fact that during my research, I'm talking to some contractors and I'm discovering that there are fantastic ideas, innovations, and what contractors can do, right, to reduce their carbon impact. However, the contractors are not even aware of this particular, you know, research. Everything is in academic journals. But you mentioned something about, you know, putting those insights together for, you know, layman, the contractors, everybody out there to benefit from that. So what incentive can the CIB do so that, you know, researchers don't just focus on publishing in academic journals alone, because this is what makes them, you know, get promotion, etc. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you know, I run the risk of upsetting plenty of people who are really good at this already in the network, to be fair. But I think the starting point is the question: where does industry get its knowledge? Where does it get its new ideas from? And whatever those channels are we happy that researchers are plugging into those channels? So, for example, professional bodies. You know, some professional bodies are involved with CIB. Plenty of academics and researchers are involved with professional bodies. We've had keynote speakers in this conference, two former presidents of the Chartered Institute of Building, for example. But, you know, are we plugging enough into those channels? The industry gets its knowledge from industry journals, as you point out. It doesn't read the recognised and encouraged journals that I referred to earlier, but it has its own, I'll call them magazines, for want of a better phrase. So are we doing enough to publish in the language of the industry, in the media of the industry, in a way which will bring our research to their attention? I absolutely, as I hope you gathered from my presentation, do not have the answers to this at a personal, let alone a CIB level, but I'm very, very interested in ideas and examples of what has worked for others. Because if we just understand what has worked and do more of that and encourage others to be aware of what has worked and encourage them to do that, then I think we will make a big difference.
Okay, I'm conscious of the time. Chris and Taha, I would like you to be brief, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Don. That was an excellent presentation. I think what you know, it was almost like you'd followed up on purpose with some of the things that I'd raised with the Sustainable Development Goals. Yeah. So very fortuitous, both obviously thinking on similar lines. I mean, I think that the thing that you know, for a long time looking at what academics do and some of the barriers between academia and practice, and you know, I think we've achieved our success at Leeds by being a centre of applied research and always looking at how you do distill that academic content down. I couldn't help but think, you know, across all the activities of the CIB, there was that opportunity to cut through those themes and break down some of the silos. So look at what were the cross-cutting themes to achieve some impacts, civic, social, and with industry in a commercial sense. And I think, you know, through some of these conversations like this, we can start to distill some of those. So I think it's quite exciting. So I just really pleased by the things you were saying. So more a comment of support than a question, but I think there's an opportunity to look at the cross-cutting themes across the CIB activities.
Thanks, Chris.
I appreciate that. If I could say one sentence of response, Mike Beam and the chair of our programme committee, Kalle Kakkonen from Tampere in Finland, are at the moment engaged in an exercise to review our cross-cutting themes. They're really important in terms of communications, but as you point out, you know, very important in terms of impact. So I do think the focus of a new set of cross-cutting themes, which I'm sure we'll announce ahead of or at World Building Congress 2022, will be a really important step forward.
Thank you. Taha, if you can be very quick, please.
Yes, I will be very brief, and I will have the chance to elaborate with Don when I meet him later today. I have a comment, a question, and a plea. The comment is about the fragmentation of the industry, and you have touched upon that. And for so many years, so many publications, research, studies, tackled that issue, and also government reports, Latham, Egan, and others around the world. My question is that the nature of the beast of the construction industry, and we have to live with it and find solution around it? Although we have integrated project delivery systems and approaches, PPP, boot systems and others, but I will leave it there because of the time. And the plea for the CIB to outreach for the third world countries, especially with the student chapter type of initiatives, and to support early researchers in these countries, and to support universities as well, teaching and research. And I'm sure CIB will have great impact in doing so. And I will leave it there as well, very short. Thank you.
Thank you. Quickly, Don. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. We finish. I'd like to thank Chris and Don for inspiring these speeches. Now we go to track 7 and track 8. We still have very interesting papers. I hope you stay behind. In particular, we're coming back after we finish the papers at 4:15 to this same room for closing remarks. So we very much bring together any emerging issues, any emerging themes, and maybe suggestions from you for the future. So thank you all very much. And let's move to track 7 and track 8. Thank you.